So the whole of today pretty much, and also last week, I've talked to you about ancient stories, I've talked to you about ancient games today, and the goal really is for me to give you a sense of the bigger picture of storytelling and also a bigger picture of narrative, right? What is narrative? This one is a little bit of a recap of what I've already mentioned before. If you think about story is the content, what you put in the story, that is the content. But narrative is about how you tell the story. So if you still remember last week, different kinds of stories use different kind of tools. Okay, so obviously Chinese opera, you're using the tool of the voice, you're using the tool of the the visual, using the makeup. Obviously wayang kulit, you are using the tool of the screen, the shadows. So narrative really refers to the tools you use. And ancient games, of course, you're talking about tools like the rubber ball for the Mayan ball game, or you're talking about the chess pieces and the chessboard, or the go pieces and the go board. And sumo is talking about, I guess, the stage, the ring, and also, of course, you need the wrestlers to be a certain size. So all these things are ways to tell the story of that game. And the story might not actually, in some cases, the story actually is not that complicated and might not even be that much story, and the focus is more on the tools that you use, which is the narrative. So that's why this course is a bit of both. All right, so when you create the games for your group later, some of you might have created a game where the story is very complicated, lots of complex characters, and your story is very, how should I say, it's not a very simple story. And in which case your tools, you might not want to have too many complicated tools because your story is already very complicated. Now, others of you, you might have a different method where your story is not that hard, it's quite simple, but you're trying to have very complicated gameplay. So your tools for your game is more, and your narrative is much more involved than the actual story. Okay, so that's kind of like the difference. Now, of course, you have games that do both. Okay, story also complicated, narrative, the tools also very complicated. And a lot of those games are the AAA companies, big companies that can afford to have a huge team to do so many parts of the game. Now, moving on. So we're thinking about what tools are you using in modern or, computer games, video games. Obviously, they are not the same as ancient games. So I'm just going to talk about some of these tools here. So today I'm going to talk about basically this first tool, which is a structure, a little bit about plot. And this, I would say, is the basic of the story part. Okay, so story is part of the game, obviously. But in order to understand how the story works, it makes sense to think in terms of a structure. Okay, don't worry if you're not so clear later, I'll break it down for you. So these two things. But the three other elements which I know you're very familiar with, how to tell stories in games today, you obviously need visuals. That one is, you totally cannot run away from that. And obviously you need sound. Okay. Now, if you have a game that is text-based, there are some games like that out there, maybe you don't play them. The whole game has no visual, it's just like words, and then you click on the words and then you choose the story based on words. Now, that's perfectly fine. So you have text-based, all right? And you don't have the typical visual of like characters and all that. That's fine too. So these are three elements. Of course, you can have a game with all three elements. You can have a game with two elements or just one element. Maybe your game doesn't have any text, just have visual, maybe no sound also. Although I would think that's really weird. So sound is not just music. Obviously, sound is the soundtracks, sound effects, anything you do that generates any kind of audio. Alrighty. So when we think about games, we think about designers. We obviously are thinking about people, right? So we're thinking about jobs. Now, I'm showing this because I remember in your sharing, quite a lot of you say the first game you played is GTA. So whether you know or not the history of GTA, basically GTA was a small company that was founded, I think, in 97, if I'm not mistaken. It was called DMA Design, and then only much later it became Rockstar North, which is the company now most associated with the GTA franchise. And that was the original game designer for the first earlier GTAs. And this guy Paul Farley, later on, of course, he, like all great game designers, they move on, they get bought over by other companies. So of course he's no longer in Rockstar, but he is still credited as the game designer for this game. Now this game has many different, I guess, what do you call it, I won't say franchise. Yeah, it's franchise, not series. I guess I don't think they are very related per se. But you have different GTAs in different cities all over the world. I guess I don't really play it, so I'm not so familiar. I think you all will be more familiar than me. But so this is a good example of a game that has actually more narrative than story. So because GTA is more of like an open world type of situation, and the kick you get, my understanding anyway, is you get to do a lot of like criminal stuff, like steal cars, do like illegal activity, and that's where the fun is. And so you don't really have a very like story where you are following a particular character and the character has certain crisis and conflict. Maybe you do, but my sense of it, no. Those of you who play GTA maybe can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, moving on. So there's someone like that, and then alternatively, you have someone like David Cage, who created games like Detroit, as well as Heavy Rain, as well as Beyond Two Souls. And he's a very different kind of game designer, right? So unlike Paul Farley, which is mostly focusing on a kind of open world, do a lot of fun stuff in this world, he is very character, very story driven, right? So the world only is there for the purpose of being the backdrop for the characters to do things that relate to the story that he wants to tell. So David Cage is sort of legendary for being very character driven and story driven. And then of course this man who I already mentioned, I think week 1 or 2, right? So just to put it out there, I'm not a huge fan of Kojima's other games, which is his Metal Gear series. I really only like Death Stranding. I've tried to play his other games, but I'm like, oh my god, so much killing, because I hate to like kill things. Of course, his Metal Gear, you can also stealth. You can stealth without killing too much, but you cannot like totally not kill. In any case, he is also seen as a game designer who is very good at doing both, right? So he's focusing a lot on story, a lot on characters. He's really into his characters. They always tend to be rather male characters, if you ask me. And he also cares about the world. So he's a little bit of, I would say, looking at both sides. And of course, he cares a lot about gameplay, right? So he's a nice mix. And then the one I just showed you the video of, which is Miyamoto, considered by many to be like, I guess, the legend or one of the earliest game designers. And Miyamoto, I would say, because it's an early game designer where you don't have a lot of high-tech platforms at that time when he first started creating, so he was limited by the technological limitations to not be able to create a game that has a very strong story, because he had very small space to work with. He didn't have a lot of like very fancy special effects and graphics, so the story is very basic, and his principle is simplicity. So he's more focusing on games that are more having fun mechanics and fun gameplay, and all these people fit into all these kind of jobs. Now obviously from my previous slide, that to create a game, the tools are not just the tools of all these people here and these jobs. Without a doubt, you also need artists, okay? You also need animators, you also need programmers. But you guys are game design, so you're not going to worry so much about programming, but you should worry about other jobs too, like artists, designers for environment, concept artists, people who kind of impact you because you need to know what they're doing and they need you to guide them. Now if you go back, so you're thinking, what is this? So surely you know what this is. The game that many of you also played when you were young. Maybe your first game ever, you stole your father or mother's phone. So even a game as simple as Snake, you have someone to design it. But of course, a game as simple as Snake, you realize you don't need a lot of people, so you have one guy, and that is the Snake designer, Taneli Armanto. And he is the person who kind of like single-handedly, he himself made this game. Of course, you're thinking, of course, one guy lah, very simple anyway, this game. So Snake is an example of game like, not, you can say like there's no real story, right? So it's all about the gameplay, because the platform or using the phone is very limited. You cannot do too much, and at the time it's considered like old technology. But you still need someone to design how you want the game to look. And if you go a little bit into the history, later I can share the link. where he talks a lot. He was being interviewed, this Armanto guy, and he was being interviewed about how he created the game. And actually, he's very into music, and he helped to design, I guess, some of the sounds for the Nokia, what do you call it, ringtones and things like that. So he kind of used some of his expertise to make the Snake game have some sound effects. I cannot really remember, but those of you who played, you might remember the sound effect. So that became like an important narrative tool for him. And the sound is the thing that communicates certain kind of feeling and immersiveness, because you don't have a lot of words and you don't have a lot of story. Okay. Now, this one is just a recap of what I've talked about before, but for the benefit of those who were not here in week 1, essentially, game designer, narrative designer, game writer can be all the same job, can be one person do all, can be 3 different people, depends on how big is the company, how much manpower you have, how much money you have to employ people. But essentially, these are the things you would do, right? So, making sure you have story and the story works well with the gameplay, making sure you have characters, if your game is character driven, making sure that your world is an interesting world. Okay, whether or not the world has characters or not, we're not just talking about the environment, we're also talking about what is going on. Is this a world that is a dark world? Okay, like the Mayan ball game, it's a world about the underworld. It's about things that are dark, maybe evil, right? Or is it a world that is more positive? You're not really going to focus on dark or negative themes. Then you also need to think about game mechanics. So game designer, you are working quite closely with the game programmer, because you have to program some of the mechanics. Mechanics means like the things that a player can do in the game, and mostly that is governed by how a programmer would program the game. So you would also think about that. So if, let's say, you have a game mechanic like a lot of jumping, like Mario, right? So of course the programmer needs to know, okay, this character jumps a lot. How high can the character jump? How long does he stay in the air? How often is he going to be jumping? All those things are part of the game mechanics, and it will affect your game. So maybe you're making a very emotional, serious type of game. It'd be weird if your character is like constantly jumping, because when you jump, it's kind of like almost like a fun activity. And if your game is very serious, maybe dark and sad, and your character is like always jumping around, it seems like, but jumping feels like lighthearted fun. So that kind of game mechanic might be contradictory to your overall game world and your game story. Right? So you got to think about game mechanics that also can deliver the kind of story you want. And last but not least, of course, you're going to write the script. Now, the only thing you should be very happy for our class is you do not have to write the script. Okay, so for your game design document, I don't expect you to write a script. Script, basically, you are writing all the characters say what. So this character say this character say that, all that you have to write down. And let me just say, just for fun, I'm going to tell you that a simple game where you have many characters, they're not saying much, you still have to write a lot of script. All right, because each character must have a lot of possible words they can say, and sometimes you have gamers who want to listen to all the words, so you have to have many options so that it's not boring. You can, of course, just limit it to a few things, but then after a while the gamer will be, why this character only say 2 things? Like, okay, good morning. Everything is okay, good morning. Like, what the hell? What kind of like stupid game writing is this? So you can have gamers with high expectations, but if you create a game like Snake, nobody talks. Yay. Alright, moving on. So what exactly are you trying to do when you create a game with story? Is you're trying to connect with the player, right? You're using a world, you're using characters to make the player feel a part of this world. And that's essentially what this quote is by this game writer Tom Bissell. I'm not going to read the whole quote, you can read it yourself. You want the player to be part of this storytelling process, which is unfolding as the player plays. And according to Tom, which is what Tom looks like here, who also happened to have written a book about this, for him, it is important that we have this space where players can do this kind of engagement. So the space is what I mean by the game world. What does this game world space look like? Is it a very open space? Is it a very tight space with a lot of buildings? Is it very claustrophobic? Is it dark? Is it light? Is it bright? All those kind of stuff. Now, this guy is no small fry game writer, right? So these are some of the games that he has written for that you might be familiar with. So you know that, when whatever he says is coming from a place of experience. Okay, so that's just kind of all the little bit of introduction, and now we're going to get to the meat of today's activity you're going to be doing in a short while. And today I'm only going to introduce two very simple concepts, which is plot and structure. So what are these two things? Let's start with the most basic thing. Now just think, okay, before I share anything, ask yourself, has anybody ever told you a story? Like read you a story? Or maybe you read a story to someone else, or you read the story yourself. So if you think about when you were a child, maybe you had a story told to you. Okay, so it's like, usually story will start with like, okay, once upon a time, there was this princess. Okay, so you have this kind of like storytelling technique. Now, a story is a story because there's always something happening, and then another thing happening, and then another thing happening. So once upon a time, there was a princess. Okay? And this princess was very sad. Oh, okay. She was sad because her father had died when she was young. Okay? So you're waiting, right? You're waiting like, okay, what next? What next? What next? Now, all that we call the plot. The plot is basically what's going to happen next and what's going to happen next. So when you guys tell a story to someone, you're usually telling the plot. Another word for it in the game world, sometimes people say the beats of a story. It's like the music beat, right? The rhythm. So you get used to a certain beat and you expect the beat to be a certain way because it's a story. So all plots are really detailed, step by step, what happens. That is plot. Now for this class, I'm not really so interested in plot. Why? Because plot is very long, very detailed, and if you are a game writer, good luck, God bless you, because you have to write that plot. So if your game is 40 hours long, God bless you, because you have to write probably a few hundred pages of plot, right? Because when you write the plot, you have no visuals. You're basically saying, okay, now the game starts in this abandoned building. The abandoned building is in a dark corner of a dark alley in this city that is in America. And that's just like the 2 sentences to tell you what is the building. You haven't even talked about what time of day, who are the characters. All that is also part of plot because you're setting the stage for what happens next. So plot is detailed, is long. And if you look at some of the sample GDDs which I shared, a lot of your seniors very into plot. Okay, now what's the problem if you have plot with no structure? Is you actually don't know overall what your story is about because you're totally like, drowning in the details, as I say. So here's where structure comes in. So what is structure? Structure is how you organize all your basic beats of your plot into something which you cannot see, which I'm going to call the internal skeleton. Okay, so imagine you as a human being, you have a body, you have a skeleton. Now everything everything your body has, all the parts, is sort of like sitting on a frame, which is your skeleton. Now we can't see the skeleton in our body, but we know it's there, right? Because if we remove the skeleton, bye-bye, we're going to collapse. So essentially, just think about it this way. The structure is actually more important than the plot. If you have the structure, you can change the plot, but the structure remains. So you don't have to worry that your story is going to be weird because your structure is already predetermined or you already established it from the beginning. So always when I teach, I tell everybody, know your structure and make sure your structure is like stable and clear. Once you have your structure, then only you put in your plot. Now, some of your seniors that never listen to me, first thing they do is plot, and then they have 40 pages of plot. And once you have a lot of plot, what's the problem? When I ask you, what's the structure? Then you start telling me the plot. And then I say, I don't have 2 hours for you to tell me the plot. What's the structure? Because structure you can summarize. If you have all plot and no structure, it means actually you don't know what your story is about. Okay, why do I say this? Oh, yes, I'm gonna move now to the next slide. Because structure in the world of storytelling, okay, there are many types of structures, but generally speaking, there are really 2 most common ones in game story in particular. In other types of stories, they are not game as well, but These are the two most common ones. And in game, actually, hero's journey is super, like super, 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 super popular. Then there's also the 3x structure, right? So some of hero's journey can fit into this, but this one is generally like its own structure on its own. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that structure. But why is it important to have structure? So you kind of know roughly where your story or how your story is going to progress based on the structure. Remember, I said plot is just a detail. You can change the detail. So let's go into more detail. So for today, I'm going to talk about both, but later when you do your tutorial activity, you're only going to focus on this 3x structure. You're not going to focus on this. Okay? So let me explain the hero's journey first, because it's actually quite easy and you might know a lot of games like this. Alright, so this guy, Joseph Fares, he's my prime example. In other lectures, I will spend a lot of time breaking down some of his games for you. I'm sorry, I might have to spoil some of his games for you as well. But a lot of the games that he makes, the beauty of it is the experience of playing it. So I won't spoil too much. So these are the two games he has created. And he's also the guy who is involved, or rather his studio. I'm sure he's also involved, but his studio primarily, Starbreeze, they are involved in the latest game that is very popular now during this COVID time, which is this game It Takes Two, right? So if you've seen it on Steam, it's like a multiplayer game. So anyway, to cut a long story short, forget about these games first. Let's focus on this graphic here. So if you look at hero's journey, this is how the hero's journey works. Most important, number one, it's circular. Notice, you start, you end, you come back to the beginning. So number one is circular, okay? Number two, there is always a split. A split meaning a split in the circle where you're going somewhere that you don't know and then you're going to come back to the place that you know. So if you look at this hero's journey chart, okay, let's say we start here. This is where the guy starts. Sorry, not here. I'm totally blind. So if you start here, okay, here's the starting. This character of yours starts here. You're going to go. You're going to come back here, right? So notice there's a line in the middle. So this line in the middle here is the world, the normal world, meaning the normal world that this character knows, that is familiar to him or her. The below here is all the unknown, the mysterious, the dangerous, the maybe I might die, okay? All this stuff down here. So if you have this character here, he starts, and the hero's journey has a lot of points. These are all the points, okay? Call to adventure, meet the mentor, blah blah blah, all these are points. Now I'm not going to go into detail now. I'll go into detail another day, but it's just to let you know these are all the classic points in a hero's journey. And you might say, this hero's journey come from where? Like who created this hero's journey? Actually, it's not created by any person. There is one guy whose name is Joseph Campbell, who is a kind of like a historian, anthropologist. And what he did for most of his life before he died is he went all around the world and he listened to, or he collected many stories from many cultures all over the world. And then he tried to figure out what is the structure of all these stories. Their details are all the different details, right? Different names, different names of places, all different. But he believed there is a structure that is common to many global stories all over the world. And finally, after like decades of research, he came up with the hero's journey as a structure. So he said a lot of stories, mythological stories especially, have this hero's journey structure. And when you play a lot of games, you realize, I realized like, damn, this hero's journey is like damn common. A lot of games have this structure. How does the structure work? Very simple. You start a game, something happened, and then you get, immersed in something that happened. And then after that, you go somewhere you don't know. And then after that, when you go to that new place, then a lot of bad shit happens to you. You have a lot of trials. You have a lot of obstacles. You have a lot of difficulties. There are people who help you along the way. You might find some friends along the way. Along the way, you start getting more skills. You start leveling up. You start getting better. You're improving. Then as you go, they'll reach a point where you meet a boss. Okay? And then the boss will kill you. And then when you get killed, you're like, oh damn. And then you're going to restart that level and then you're going to fight again the boss. And you're going to death reborn, until you finally defeat the boss and you're like, okay, great, let's continue. So then you continue and you continue along this journey where somehow the story will unfold, different story, different kind of plot. But that doesn't matter because the goal of meeting all these bosses and the final boss is to test you, to make you stronger, to make you level up. Do you have enough weapons to fight this boss? Did you go exploring enough to get enough tools to help you to fight this boss? Did you basically have enough patience to grind, to do what is necessary to win or to kill this boss? Then you get a revelation, like, actually, to kill this boss, I need to do A, B, C, and D. Maybe you found this out through your friend. Maybe you got some help along the way. And then on the final part of the journey, you find yourself, you feel like, oh, I did a great thing. You feel like my life is awesome, it's complete now. And then you finish the game. So when you finish the game, here it says you go back to the beginning. Of course, the beginning doesn't mean the actual beginning, like actually where you started. It could be a different beginning, but the beginning meaning you're going back to a place where now everything is peaceful before you started on this journey. Right? So that's kind of like Hero's Journey in a nutshell. Right? And the idea is always, if you think about games like God of War, good example, Hero's Journey, all these brothers, A Way Out, very good example. So in the end, you're always kind of like going back to yourself and you're a different person now. Right? All the shit you went through over here, all the people you met, all the bosses you killed, and then you died all those times, all that has made you a changed person. So that is a hero's journey in a nutshell. And the core idea of hero's journey is that character, the main character, is the character that will go through all these obstacles and change and become a different person. So that's character arc. Okay, you might remember this word from your character design, your assignment brief, okay, on page 2. So this is what I mean by character arc. Not to worry, I will definitely be going more into detail when I cover character design lecture, not this week. Alright, so that's the hero's journey in a nutshell. Again, I will go into detail later, so not to worry too much. You can go and find out some info by yourself if you wish. Later, I'll post some videos to also like break it down further. If you find that my explanation like maybe not cow enough lah, not as good as you would hope. Okay, moving on. So hero's journey, simple. And next, we're talking about 3-act structure. So 3-act structure is a structure that is used a lot in TV, movies, animated films, books, fiction, novel. Is actually almost, I would say, the most common structure of a lot of media and entertainment that we create today. Now, what makes 3-act structure different from hero's journey? Hero's journey, remember I said the core structure is circle. So you always like go back to the beginning, so to speak, or you go back to a point where you meet yourself and you're a changed person. So it's almost like the Lion King, a circle of life, so to speak. Now, 3-act structure is not circular. It's what we call a linear structure. That means you progress, you go forward in time, and then the ending is different place than when you started. So 3-act structure, as you can see here, very, very basic and very simple. If this is the simplest image I could find. 3-act, you start with the first act. First act is you set up everything lah, right? Who's the character, where's the world, where you're in, what's the issue. You set it up. Act 2 is always like all the shit you have to do. Okay, maybe you go on a journey, maybe you have to fight some bosses, whatever, all the stuff you have to do. Notice it's going up. Going up means the level of excitement or the level of difficulty is getting greater. Then you will reach a point where it's like the most craziest shit you're ever going to go through. You almost thought you're going to die already. This is it. Maybe the whole game it will end because you failed the big boss, whatever you want to call it, the climax. Then once you have achieved that, your final achievement, okay, then the game will start to wind down. Alright? So this third act is basically the last part lah. You've already done what you need to do, you achieved it, and then, basically you're going to end already. So this third act can be very short actually. So this drawing, you can see here this image. Act 2 is always the longest. Act 3 and Act 1 looks about the same size, but actually not really. Most of the time, Act 1 is actually longer. Act 3 can be like actually very short. Okay, and in game world, Act 3 sometimes can be like super short. Like you finish this one, over, bye. Okay, so Act 3 can be like also like 0 Act 3. So story structure, 3-act structure is like this. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Now I can go a little bit more detail if you wish. Okay. So if you go a bit detailed, this is a funny 3-act structure. Slightly different, more humorous way of looking at it. So notice same concept here. This is the first act here. Then all this is second act going up until you reach the high point. Then this one third act going to end already. Okay, see, life as usual. Then bad shit happens, then whoa, more shit happens. Oh my god, we're alive. Oh no, gonna die already. Okay, oh, some horrible, very ultimate moment. Fight. Okay, I did it. Okay, rest ready. Okay. Now it's a different life already. Now I'm a different person. But you're not the same person, like you're not going back to the beginning per se. Alright, so you're kind of moving to a different, maybe different dimension, different story now, or you're just done. Right? So for the basic plot structure of 3 act structure, it's still here. It's just that you got a whole lot of details. All these are details. For me, I don't really care because I still see it's still looking like a mountain. Alright? Mountain go up, come down. Same concept except this mountain got a little bit of obstacle here and there. Okie dokie. So, if you go into classic storytelling theory, there are books on storytelling theory if you're interested. I didn't post any of it because I thought you already having a headache from game camera documents. If you have storytelling theory, you're completely like shit your pants. So 3 act structure, if you really want to go in detail, there's a lot of different stuff. Okay, a lot of different like phases. Some of it can be quite similar to Hero's Journey. They also copy or take ideas from each other. But look at the basic structure. Mountain go up, climax. Okay, here maybe a longer climactic moment and then start to wind down. Okay, remember this is about excitement level, obstacle level, difficulty level, and then later at the end, chill already. Okay, so that's 3 act structure. Now, any questions? Because I'm going to give you your task after this. Any question? Everybody clear on 3 act structure? Okay. So let me move to the next slide, which is your tutorial activity. So for your tutorial activity, whoa, why got one dot there? Okay, that's like a freaking mindfuck dot. Alright, so I don't know what that dot is doing there. I had nothing to do with it. It's probably the ghost dot. But whatever it is, for your tutorial activity, we are going to watch a short film. Okay, so we watched the film first together for fun because it is very funny, I think, and it's not too long. Then I'll post the link and you can re-watch it if you need a refresher or if you still cannot remember stuff. Alright, so we're going to watch this short film first, and then later I'm going to let you all break into your groups by yourself. I already named the channels by your name of your group leader's name. Then, okay, so forget this one, preferably a group, because I wasn't sure whether all of you had your groups yet. So definitely break into your groups. Then your job in your group, discuss with your group members. You're going to break down this ginseng short animation. You're going to break down the story based on the 3 act structure. Okay, so you're going to use, obviously, my slides. I will post it later, don't worry. So you're going to break down the ginseng story and you're going to tell me, okay, so act 1 is what happened. Then when act 2 start. Then act 3 when. So you're going to basically do that kind of breakdown. And one last task, which is probably the hardest, you're going to summarize the entire short film into 50 words or less. So I'm taking this word count very seriously because for games, if you go to Steam and you're trying to find a game, you will notice there's always like a short little few sentences to describe what the game is, and those words, the word count is very short. You're not writing 100, 200, 300. Sometimes it's really like 50 words or less. So I'm trying to force you all to really ask yourself, this short film is about what? Try to totally like narrow it down to 50 words. Okay, the core thing about this film is actually, what is the story about, if I had to ask you? Okay, so just like just now, remember the Mario Shigeru Miyamoto YouTube video? If you think about Mario, what is Mario? Mario is basically bad guy, Donkey Kong, good guy, Mario Plumber, poor girl, being kidnapped. So the essential story of Mario in one sentence is good guy Mario trying to save girl from bad guy Donkey Kong. Right, essentially. So you're going to do the same kind of principle with this short animated film. And then later when you're done, I will call all of you and you're going to read out your summary, or you can type it out, or whatever you wish. And then you're going to, of course, tell me what is the 3 act structure. And maybe, because this short film is not quite as simple as you might think, maybe some of you might have a different way of approaching the 3 act structure.